Rich, we got Richard, Charlie's just there. Who else? Let's see. Got Judy, Colin.
Megan isn't able to join us today, but this is, we'll probably have to deal with this as a more formality, but Megan is no longer on Science and Data. She's on cross-sector. Colin is the new co-chair of Science and Data. I feel like we're at this point in the process where we're just going to stick with what we got since Megan's still an official subcommittee member. But Colin's also here today and can speak when and if there's a need for air quality or comments around DC permitting and things like that, since Colin's expertise lies there too.
Great. All right, good. Okay, so let me run through the agenda and we'll dive in. So just again, remind people of the ground rules. We kind of keep us focused. We want to kind of listen generously as we also try to kind of really hone this document and get ready to have a set of recommendations for the council. So really most of the time is really dedicated to going through this document, and it's kind of now in three parts, which I'll describe in just a second. And we'll make sure we have a public comment at 9:30. And then I think we'll have another one at 10:15 or so. I think when we're working on the document, it is really helpful for people to focus on that. So I think we will turn off chat. I think last time worked really well to help people focus, but we'll make sure that there's at least two times for substantive comment, partly as we go, so people can comment kind of as you track what we're doing here. We also then need to talk a little bit about other parts of the report, which I'll describe in a second, again, those three parts, and then talk a little bit about next week's meeting. And, the idea is to have it in person and why, and we'll talk through that a little bit towards the end. So the document is in kind of three parts now. There was an introductory part, which I think everyone felt needed a fair amount of editing and maybe it was too long. And so that is something we'll need to figure out how to kind of maybe consolidate or make more concise. So that's kind of a work in progress. And Jane, I don't know, maybe you and I were going to try and take a crack at that part, the opening few paragraphs. Okay. And then the second part is sorry for the dog. The second part is the recommendations, which we're going to project on the screen in a minute, which we put in a separate Google Doc. The only red line in there is just a few red lines that came out of last time's meeting. And then I left all the comments from anybody, the drafting group or stuff that I got after from the last, I don't know, probably 2 weeks. And then the third part of the document is all the findings, where I think in conversation with many of you, that felt like it was going to be a heavy lift to get right. There needed to be more citations, more accuracy. So we need to figure out what to do with that part of the document, because that's, I think, a little bit heavier lift about how to get that quote unquote right. So those are the three parts. So why don't we just take some questions first, Richard and then Charlie.
Yeah, I seem to have lost the thread here. Maybe I'm the only one, but wasn't there a discussion about this document with the council or the steering committee? Were we going to hear a report about those activities before we plunge into the document?
Yeah, we'll do that in just a second. So I just want to give an outline of what we had, and the first thing that Liz and Jane are going to do is go through the conversation with the council. Yes, absolutely. Charlie.
I just wanted to confirm when we talk about the document, there was a Google Doc link that was sent around that had a date 10/19/22, and then there was a PDF that I think came out with the agenda. That's a PDF, 6 November 22, comments added 10/13/22. I just want to make sure, is the PDF a direct reflection of what the Google Doc was, or are those different, or what's the most recent one to be looking at for the conversation today?
So I don't know if Pat, you checked again, but I checked with Pat yesterday morning before I started moving docs around, and nobody had edited the Google Doc. So I took the last recommendations and comments as of the meeting that you all discussed 2 weeks ago and created. So it's just the document that you see on the website is the whole document with the whole opening, whole recommendations, all comments, all findings. That's the broad document as I know to be the latest version. And then all I did was create a Recs only doc. So when we get to talk about the recommendations, we can talk one by one without overcomplicating all the other components. And then I took the liberty of trying to create a very short opening as a suggested starting place for you all, if that's what you would like to do add to the recommendations after this week or next week.
And we'll go through that one more time in just a second, just to make sure everybody's clear, Charlie, because you're probably not the only one who's trying to sort out what's on what. But maybe to Richard's point, let's maybe start, because we recognized we weren't done. We thought, less was more to say to the council as they were meeting after our last meeting, and Liz and Jane and maybe others were there. So Jane and Liz, I kind of turn it over to you all to kind of just give an update.
Liz, do you want me to defer to you, or would you like me to do
No,
it?
well, I spoke, and so therefore wasn't taking notes as I was doing it. So, I mean, I'm happy to just, for those of you who weren't there, I let the council know where we were. And I think, as summarized at the end of our last meeting, the short version is we weren't there yet, and that there was consensus that there was more time needed. So I think, Richard, to your question, the document itself, although of course publicly available in terms of what we looked at, we didn't present something specific to the council for their consideration. Instead, we gave them an update on our timing and let them know that this group specifically was asking the council to give us guidance on what the council would be doing with any set of consensus recommendations we were able to present, so that, it's a little bit of a, chicken egg, but so that this group could know sort of what its ultimate work product would be used for, because that might help, refine and define our work in these last, few weeks, if we are to give it to the council in time for the November meeting, which will allow them to then consider it in December. So I think that's pretty much the summary. I went into a little bit more detail about what we had heard and what our process had been, but the short version was letting them know that while we had started to consider a set of joint recommendations, we had not yet come to consensus or completed that work and would need more time to do so. We'd also then got the feedback from the council on what their sense was of what they would do with the recommendations, and in general, presuming that they're presented to the council, and I'll get to the subcommittees in a second, for consideration. It sounds like what the council would expect to do is to append or amend and append to last year's climate action plan, so that it actually becomes a part of that document. The other thing the council gave guidance on, I think there was wide agreement on this point, it felt like, was that they did want the subcommittees to take a look at our work, because that's kind of a process that the council has used for other task groups, such as transportation. And so there was some discussion about how best to accomplish that, given that we have such cross-cutting issues and more than one subcommittee involved. And after some discussion, I think, although there was some discretion, of course, left in Jane and others in figuring out how exactly to plan it, one of the ideas that came forward was to hold one of our meetings jointly with the subcommittees, invite everybody basically, so that people could hear each other. Because one of the things that we had learned, I think, on this group was that there had been sort of separate meetings of the subcommittees talking about these issues, but not yet a chance for them to hear each other, or for either of the subcommittees to hear about our work, over the summer and since last spring. So I think I'll stop there. Jane, I wasn't taking notes, so if I either got that out of order or disjointed, or there's anything else to add, go ahead.
Thanks, Liz. And Judy had a question too. So Jane, anything else to fill in before I go to Judy?
I think Liz hit all the process points, and then I could actually explain a little bit of clarity around what I was thinking about with subcommittee meetings, and my process for how I started to move that forward, knowing the timing.
Great. Judy, go ahead, and then we'll come back to that.
Thanks for reporting, Liz, but I'm a little confused, because our recommendation of what you should have presented was that we were not ready. And yet they saw our recommendations that were drafts and not fully discussed, and based recommendations on our draft recommendations.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, Judy. That may be true to the extent that they went and looked at documents that had been posted, because of course they're publicly posted. But we didn't, in the committee meeting, or the council meeting rather, discuss in any respect our substantive draft or where we were in that draft. And my absolute, if you weren't at the meeting, I know Cheryl, Joy was, and some others, definitely go back and feel free to take a look. But my headline was exactly that we are not ready and that we had nothing to present.
So how did they feel that they could make recommendations to us without seeing anything?
Well, the second part of what I had understood I was asked to do by this task group was to get feedback from the council on what they expected to do with any recommendations that came forward from this group, because there were at least several of us on the task group that had asked for that guidance because there was uncertainty about what exactly would happen with the document. Would it become part of the climate plan? Would it just be some free-floating report as some other things the council has commissioned? What would it be? And so I did ask, because I understood that I was supposed to, for that guidance, which led to the general understanding from the council that, presuming that we do come to them with a set of recommendations, they would consider it for addition to the climate plan itself, which I took as good news in terms of the importance of the work, and that they wanted the subcommittee process to kind of work the same way it had worked in other circumstances. But all of that was process oriented. It wasn't substance oriented, because none of the recommendations in our draft process, the actual draft in process, were discussed.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Judy. So Jane, maybe then a follow on to the process piece about how you're thinking about, there's a number of layers here and we're trying to be as efficient as we can. So what was your thinking about how to, once we're ready, how did we move this through the committee structure?
Yeah, so the idea being that the subcommittees would want to listen in, participate in the dialogue. I thought that if there was no discussion at the council meeting about sort of changing the timeline, I will say, about at the very least a progress report, still shooting for the end of December now. But if that report includes tangible recommendations, which we seem to be circling around, a handful of actionable recommendations, and then a handful of recommendations that point to ongoing work into the future for this task group or another formation of this task group in some ways, that they would take action on those at their scheduled December meeting. And therefore we would still be working in good faith, which is what I tried to signal in my email to you all, to bring forward a draft in November, again, of a suite of some recommendations and then some recommendations for continued action for the council to consider. And so in order to plan along that schedule, appreciating that we might not make it, but trying to, I wanted to open the door for subcommittees to participate in the next two task group meetings. And there's a little bit of nuance there. I think that the meeting next week, which Pat and I were going to discuss, Pat will be with us in Vermont for another meeting on Tuesday, coincidentally. So it was easy for Pat to stay over and meet with us in person next Wednesday. And I worked, assuming we would discuss today, that work meeting in person was beneficial to sort of reach agreement on tricky points. I did work with the Intervale and scheduled the Intervale conference room in their hayloft barn. And I wanted to make that a subcommittee meeting, appreciating that many subcommittee members may not choose to actually travel and be with us in person. Having it be an officially warned meeting of the subcommittees allows me to pay you all official per diems to join us, as well as mileage to travel. So it's sort of a way to make sure that we can at least, I know it's not a lot, but validate having you join us in person and reimburse you for that. I've heard from many subcommittee members that some will join, some won't, but many I tried to articulate point to November 9th, where my hope had been, if we had a productive meeting next Wednesday and we're able to reach a working draft, that would be a really good time to invite in the other subcommittees to have a robust conversation about where we're at and where we're going. And so I thought the next two meetings would be officially warned as subcommittee meetings with this task group, inviting everyone in. So that was my thinking, appreciating that we might not reach consensus on everything for the next few months, but knowing that we have an eye on the December meeting with an interim report still again in November, that was what I thought we would shoot for.
And Jane, just one last date, and people may ask questions. When is the November council meeting?
I think it's like the 14th. It's around that time.
Okay.
I can't remember. I have to look at a calendar to remember like what the actual day.
Just thinking about it as sequence, so
Yeah, I was right. It's the 14th. So the idea would be the 9th would be a place where we would get to a draft with the other subcommittee members present.
Right. So questions about process before we dive into the report about kind of what we're trying to shoot for here. Richard, did that help clarify from your good first question?
This is Billy. I just want to flag that I have a long-standing conflict next week, so I won't be able to join that meeting. So yeah, I'm a little concerned if that's going to be the kind of substantive decision-making conversation, but hopefully we'll make adequate progress today that will alleviate those concerns. So I just want to flag that for you. Thanks.
And we will circle back to that, Billy, towards the end to see kind of where we are by 10:20 or whatever it is. So, okay. Any other questions on process for now? Jane, thanks for explaining that. Okay. Oh, Judy, go ahead.
Will this in-person meeting be discussion, or will this in-person meeting be a tour?
I was hoping we'll talk about that at the end today, but there's plenty of time. I'm hopeful that we would have time to have a substantive discussion meeting and then for folks who are able to stick around for a tour.
Judy, do you have a preference?
You know, Patrick, sometimes I think I live there. So I just want to know what it is.
No, absolutely.
That it's sacred land for us, so I'm there frequently.
Well, I think it would be lovely in that sense to be your guest and to be there and to be in person and to kind of work together as we try to wrap this up, though I heard Billy's concern, and potentially to, actually be a part of the site that we've been talking about for some time, but solely on Zoom. Okay. So Jane, if we could project, I think whatever you want to work off, the Google Doc's probably easiest, but we're going to focus first on the whoop.
Google and I don't like work together.
Okay.
Could I have a Word document if that works?
Yeah, totally fine. Whatever you want to project. And I think again, we'll focus. Our thought is, if it's okay with the group, we'd focus on the recs first, and we'll worry about the front piece, and then we'll worry about the findings piece. So, and again, the comments to the side are just, they all have my name on them, but they're not my comments. Those are all comments that were actually were developed by all of you and sent in at various times. So they're all there if you want to look at them as we go. So I think what we'll do is just try to crank through these and see if we can reach a tentative agreement with the language as we go. And we may have to wordsmith because that's kind of where we're at. So bear with us. Number one actually did get modified. We had some discussion last time, and I think we reached that sentence about they will not decarbonize the state's electricity generation. So that was added in, I believe. Is that right, Jane? Whoops, no, actually, that's not right. I'm taking that back. Actually, we actually worked on language. Jane, the language I think we worked on there was state of Vermont should not be utilized as they will not move the state towards decarbonized electric generation. So we did a modification of that. Most people were actually okay with that's number one.
Yeah. Let me make sure.
Yeah, I had thought we had just decided to put a period at the end of utilized, but regardless.
Pat, I don't think there was consensus around that. That was something that I voiced some general okayness with at the very end of the meeting, but the conversation was certainly not done. And I don't think there was consensus from others.
Let's do this. Let's do this point. We may just put a period, but let me just put that other language in so we can look at it and then we can decide what to do with it. So Jane, the other language was as they will not move the state towards decarbonized
Or
towards.
Can we Can I throw out some alternative like reasoning on this one? I mean, they're inefficient and they're better generation resources. Can we just leave it at that? Like, I think this whole like, does it carbonize or does it not? Like, I think we're gonna have a hard time reaching consensus on something which, yeah, like, we can just say, don't utilize them. And there are other factual justifications of like, there's other better generation sources and they're efficient.
Let's have a little discussion, then we can come back to wording. What do people think about Adam's reformulation of that?
I think it should say they should not be utilized because they're not efficient. What were we told? Something like 20% efficient?
Let me go Charlie and then Chase.
I mean, I'm all for being just as concise as possible and short. And I think that our objectives here, you know, like what we're recommending or why we're recommending it are clear. And so for something like this, I think just saying a period after the parentheses is fine, because the reason we're proposing this is because it reflects all the other stuff that we're doing. So I guess I don't think we need to justify it. I think we just need to say it, and the justification is clear as to what our objectives are.
Great. Chase.
I think Liz's suggestion of putting a period after utilize is probably the neatest, sort of cleanest way to do this. I'd pile on to that suggestion.
Let me just test that then. Let's just, Jane, do you want to just go ahead and do that and just put a period after the parenthetical?
You want the parent?
I think we want the parenthetical, right? Liz, that was your suggestion, period after the parenthetical.
You know, I don't really care. Someone had mentioned that proposed isn't really within the state's purview anyway. So to me, I don't think you need the parenthetical. But
okay. Maybe we keep it really then even shorter and more concise.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna, you know, that's not as important, I don't think, is the second part.
Good. So if anybody, and again, just either if anybody can't live with number one, raise your hand and make a comment, or if you want to just talk to Richard, go ahead.
Can we find a better word than utilized? If we're going to take out the parenthesis, which explained what we meant by utilized, I mean, does it mean now that we can build it, we just shouldn't use it?
Well, and can I just, Richard, sorry to jump in. One of the reasons why I wondered if the parenthetical was a good idea, just to get to what I think your concern is, proposed, permitted, and built, even if all those three things happened, in theory, the plant may or may not be utilized in Vermont if the utilities don't actually contract and take. So I actually was concerned that the parenthetical might be limiting, you know what I mean? And so, and you know, it's the whole in border, out of border, you know, I don't know that we're looking to direct utilities on utilizing biomass out of state. Anyway, it gets complicated quickly. So
I don't know if there's any, Liz, is there any language that would work? Just because not utilized is a little funky, so I don't know if there is a.
Could we say not built?
How about just
not be built?
That Liz is like, Judy, go ahead.
I agree with Richard, but I also want to know, are these recommendations only going to the council? Because if they are, I think we need to be clearer. Because we talked about all the committees coming together, right?
Right.
So I think we need to be as clear as possible with as few words as possible. And I don't see anything wrong with adding a couple of words after utilized, or if you change the word utilize.
And the words you would add, Judy, is around inefficiency, or what would be the words you'd add?
Yeah, it's not efficient.
Let me go Richard and Adam, and we'll come back to the language here in a second. So Richard and Adam.
Wait, you didn't answer my question.
No, because that's right. Sorry. So I think, Jane, do you want to go again? So these recommendations ultimately do land at the council, correct? Muted, sorry.
Yeah,
They'd
they
go through the
do,
council.
but
Yeah.
and then they have the strength and the weight of people using them in the climate action plan. And they are often cited from the climate action plan in use. So I think, Judy, you're right, just trying to, if there's a education component of these recommendations, because they're going to be picked up and utilized in different ways from the CAP, then anything that you want to say should be there.
Yeah, I just want to be very precise with this. My understanding is that this task group is forwarding recommendations, recommended language up through the subcommittees, up to the council for them to consider. So, I think these are all recommendations that we're forwarding up through these different entities. So I think we have to just be realistic that that's what these are. And if I have that wrong, let me know, but that's my understanding.
Again, I think I would just, in supporting you all, I think the more you can just be concise and clear and specific, the more we try to kind of figure out nuanced language and the like, probably the harder it is going to be to get done. And so I just want to be careful about how we get there, so you all have the things you want forwarded to the larger public. But I think Judy raised the concern that the reader is going to need context, which is probably the thought of, I think, of the front piece we haven't looked at yet too.
So if we say Patrick should not be used because of its lack of efficiency, that says the why, that educates.
Okay. And Judy, let me just go to Adam and Chase, and I'll come back to work on language. And I'm just taking notes from the suggestion you just made.
So in terms of, I think just as written here, it is a little ambiguous in terms of last time we talked about, okay, well, there's combined heat and power. Are we talking about electric lead generation? Or are we talking about thermal lead generation, like in Middlebury College, where they have electrical generation, whether or not it's grid connected or behind the meter? There's a lot of examples of CHP that we need to be pretty crystal clear on. And this is pretty generic in its language. So I think we need to add some specifying language to say what is in the box and what's outside the box here.
Adam, do you have a proposal for what that would be?
I would say new electric lead generation biomass, because that implies that it's favoring electric generation over thermal energy, which is inherently south of 50% efficiency. But if you do thermal lead CHP, it's 80-85% efficient.
Great.
I think that notion of eliminating the opportunity to generate an increment of electrical generation with a large thermal plant is not something that I would support in this language.
Okay. Chase, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned that if we make this just about efficiency, we're sort of missing the forest for the trees, as it were. Efficiency matters, but efficiency is, of course, then linked to the overall greenhouse gas emissions. And the two relate, but they're also separate and different. And so if we really just make this about efficiency, we could then justify the creation of new biomass facilities of the sort that Adam was just outlining, that would have the ultimate result of producing additional greenhouse gas emissions at the burner tip that would accumulate in the atmosphere and cause additional climate change. And so I think as this grows and becomes sort of more specific about what's in and what's out, just based on efficiency, we are running the risk of creating recommendations that would in fact not set Vermont on a path towards reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions. And so to the extent we can keep the language simpler and not get into these types of nuances, especially ones that, although relevant, like the ones Adam is mentioning, were decided to be beyond the general scope of this task group because we weren't looking at thermal. I'm hesitant. I don't know why we would take that step now, why we would expand our scope and make a recommendation beyond our scope about something that's limited to thermal when the GHGs would not be fully accounted for, and when the impacts of that decision could be something that we would later regret.
So Chase, just to be clear, are you concerned about the addition Adam added? Or concerned about the caveat language that would potentially follow used or utilized?
So with the used or utilized caveat language, I think like Liz suggested, what was in the parentheses there may not have really captured the picture that we were intending. Once we start defining some things, then some folks might think, well, we're excluding others. And so I understood that to more or less be what Liz is saying, and I agree with that. And so I would just avoid it by putting a period after the word utilized. If we want to use a different verb there, that's fine. But then to the electric lead, I wonder why we would go there now, given that we haven't fully explored the thermal lead applications. It's been beyond the scope of this task group, and we have heard some things about it, but it really hasn't been the focus of what we've been doing. And I worry about it because if we are just limiting the justification to only efficiency, then we're not necessarily looking at the greenhouse gas emissions, which is the ultimate charge. And so it seems like it's a little far afield. Maybe it's adjacent to what we've been doing, but sort of outside the scope of what we've been doing.
Okay. We've got Judy, Charlie, Billy, and remember, we're on the first sentence only. Judy.
I guess I forgot to take my hand out, but I do want to respond to what Chase said. The purpose is, as we just discussed, to add some education here that travels along with that one statement. So perhaps there's another word other than efficiency. Maybe it's several words. Efficiency and greenhouse gas is too large, or whatever it might be. I think there has to be something there that adds that educational component.
Charlie and then Billy, then we'll take a crack at what we can do with this one. Charlie.
Thanks. To Chase's point, which I totally understand that we shouldn't be making recommendations about things that we haven't dug into as a committee. I guess I might see it a little bit flipped though, in that if we don't clarify it, then it could be interpreted as we are making a recommendation about something that we didn't dig into, if that makes sense. Like you can kind of see it both ways, that if that makes sense? Like if we don't clarify it, then it could be, oh, well, they're talking about all of it as opposed to just this. So yeah, I don't know if that squares it, but I think that could be taken either way. So
Billy.
So sorry to be a stickler for process, but we have a consensus-based scope of work that we developed months ago that focuses on electric lead generation. It's the exact words that are in our scope that are linked in the agenda through the preface language. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we've been talking about this entire time. So I don't see the problem being clear and precise there.
And
I'm happy to share that document if you want.
No, Bill, I want to check with Chase on that too, because my understanding is that was our scope. So to me, that just clarified our scope, but maybe Chase had a different, because then we do talk about thermal further below. So I was wondering whether I thought that language was also just specific to our scope too, but Chase will weigh in here if you want to argue differently. And then I'll go to the other point about the end of the sentence.
No, I don't want to argue differently. I think I just want to be careful that we're not making recommendations saying essentially we should be building more biomass facilities that are thermal lead, or it would be appropriate to do so, and perhaps this is getting to what Charlie was just saying, that the two are sort of interrelated. And so just being cognizant of that and careful with the language that we do use, I think will be important.
And when we go down to thermal below, Chase, we should look at that language with it because those things link together. Okay, Judy. So I think I think for now we'll leave the front part. We just need to figure out the end of the sentence. But Judy, go ahead.
I agree with Billy that was the scope of our work, but I also believe we need to be educating here, and so there needs to be more written.
So I have so Judy, to that point, so I'm wondering whether if we could just use the word use versus utilize, just because it's simpler. But I'm wondering whether we could say something, and it was something maybe Adam or someone said that, like, the reason I think that there's a lot of reasons, but some of them is inefficiency. Some of this is just there are better choices for new sources of electricity, right? That you're less contested because of carbon, have a lower GHG if no GHG. So I wonder if we can't figure out a kind of clause at the end without getting ourselves in trouble here. Charlie, go ahead.
I just wonder, are those, I agree with Judy about education and context. I wonder though, is that covered in other places in the broader document? If we are going to have introductory section, finding section, does that meet the need? And the recommendations themselves can be concise. It might not, but that thought comes to mind as to, do we cover that need elsewhere in this package?
And Charlie, the cover piece we haven't looked at yet might potentially do that to your point.
Yeah, and I realize that we don't have that settled yet as far as verbiage and language, but that might get to the question.
Okay, Liz, go ahead.
I just want to put another word in for simplicity on this sentence in particular, given a comment, I think, Patrick, you said a second ago about there being better sources. And while there are different ways to look at that, we did hear, and from a utility point of view, I can tell you that, you know, in actuality, we do use the biomass plants that we have at times of the year and in ways that other renewable sources don't always match. Some do, like, you know, depending upon the time that we use it and the season, but some don't. And so even something like that, I think, is subject to different things we've heard about here and therefore not consensus. And I just want to be really clear on that. I know we received material from BED directly about how its plant is utilized. And, you know, heading into this winter, I can tell you that at GMP, for Rygate, for example, which has been going through difficulties, as we've talked about in these meetings, we're expecting and see it as economically beneficial for our customers this winter because of the way the energy markets are higher right now. So you can't just, I guess, any individual statement risks not being complete enough or missing some other nuance. I guess I'll leave it there.
No,
Hey, Liz, a follow-up question to that is that that's true for the two existing plants. Is that, well, does that point hold true for a new plant, which is what the recommendation is for?
Yeah, no, I'm fine with the recommendation with the period. And the reason why it would potentially be true even for a new plan is, again, just from an hours point of view. If the state eventually has, as you know, we believe it probably will, a goal of not just being, you know, as carbon free as possible and as renewable as possible annually, but also looking really carefully at matching better generation and load, then that point would hold, right? So again, I don't think we need to get into all that. And I'm not suggesting that we do. I'm just explaining why, from a complexity point of view, I support the sentence in the short version.
So let me suggest this. I wonder if we can, I think we've got new electric lead generation biomass within Vermont should not be, I want to just check the word used versus utilized. And then I think I'm going to leave, I wonder if we can keep moving, but leave open the question whether or not we need education, particularly here. I think people would agree we need education in the document. It sounds like, to Liz's point, that might be hard to get it right here. So could we, I'm not saying we don't need to do it. I'm just to keep us moving. I can see if we can at least agree to the first sentence and recognize there's a kind of a holding place for how we handle the education question Judy wisely raised. So I'm wondering, is used okay versus utilized? I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. Or is there some other word people prefer? Okay. All right. So, and Jane, could you just make a like a parenthetical in the first one is just the question of education, just put a question mark or something, just so we know we don't lose track of that to have to come back. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, let's look at number 2. And thoughts or comments how to change, improve this so everyone here can consent to this second one. Judy and then Adam.
I don't think there should be an exception in there. With the only potential exception would, because we haven't done any investigation on thermal. And so until that's done, I don't think we should be saying anything about it.
And Judy, could you, if we just say we just had just the first sentence, not the second, would that be something that you could live with?
Yes.
Okay. Adam.
Yeah, so I guess on that one, I just want to make sure I understand what it actually means. The first sentence should not be expanded to generate more electricity than the current production allows. So like if McNeil's a 50 megawatt, power plant, and they're operating annually at about 70% of the time, we're saying that they can generate 24/7, 365 at that output capacity? Or is it like implying that it's binding them to what they currently generate in the tonnage? Like that is very unclear to me, what's actually being said.
Adam, a question. The limits on the two existing plants, they have like air quality permit limits. They have various kind of environmental permit limitations, correct? They can't exceed whatever. And do they have any production limits other than the technical capacity of the plant?
I mean, just the call need for electricity on the grid.
So what the markets may be calling on at any time. Okay. So is there, Adam, would there be a way to then work on that first sentence to make it more clear?
I guess it depends on the intent. I mean, I can propose language, but it may not be in line with the intent of the recommendation.
Right. And then maybe that's what we need to have a bit of conversation about. So when we say generate no more than current production, what do we mean by that? So Judy, go ahead.
On their McNeil website, it says they can stockpile fuel throughout the year and then run nearly 24/7 in the winter. So they're already running 24/7 in the winter.
So I don't know if people have, what is the intent here about not expanding the current plant's electricity generation? Does anybody have I want to offer a clarifying comment or, to Adam's question, what do we intend here?
I thought the key was expansion, which was a comment we talked about last time, whether that means physical or operational. I had understood it to mean something about physical, like something changing at the facility, but that was my understanding.
I'm happy to propose just current production capacity allows as an amended language.
I would agree with Liz. I thought this was more about physical built environment.
When what's tricky here is we could say beyond its current footprint, but then we have to describe what footprint means. But that would be more at the physical sense. And I don't know, Liz or Charlie, if we were trying to let's leave Adam's word in for the minute. Then if we were trying to describe physicality, does anyone have thoughts about how we would say that to be clear, but not have to write 5 sentences to describe it?
Couldn't you just say they should not be expanded physically?
Maybe just say physical. Jane, let's throw like should not be physically expanded. Let's just put that in there for now. We'll come back to it. I think it would be on that top. Yeah, there we go. Chase, go ahead. Then Billy.
Perhaps then if we were adding the sort of the word physically expanded, then we should put an or after the word expanded. So should not be physically expanded or expanded to generate more electricity than current production capacity allows.
Jane, did you get that?
Can I just clarify, Chase, when we use the word expanded again, is it not? I guess I'm confused as to if we say not be physically expanded or expanded to generate more, we're using expanded then twice. And do we need to differentiate what the second expanded means?
This might be getting at Adam's initial comment about just clarity around what we are talking about there. I agree that clarity is needed. I think that there's just a difference between a physical expansion, like building a new attachment to the facility, and an expansion of the amount of wood that's combusted to create electricity. You know, they could be related, they could be different. We could, you know, keep the facility's footprint identical and combust more wood, or, you know, could expand the facility and combust less wood. And so if I think, so I think that the or expanded to is just meant to sort of tease that out. But to the extent we want to clarify a little bit more about what do we mean by the second type of expanded that's used there, the language that Adam suggested, I'm toying with it. It seems to make sense. Again, it's still a little nebulous. Current production capacity allows, because right, capacity now is technically larger than what is in fact being produced. So there's quite a bit of wiggle room there, but perhaps that requires a little additional discussion among this group.
I think Billy, Liz, and Judy.
So I've been trying to pull them up, but I haven't been successful. But I believe that the certificate of public goods for both plants identify kind of a nameplate capacity, or kind of, you know, top generation capacity of the plants as currently constructed. I think what we're talking about is an increase in that capacity, right? An expansion of their ability to produce electricity. And if that's what we are talking about, I think we can just refer to that, you know, and I don't know what the exact words are, but I always thought that that's what we were talking about, was expanding the plants physically or otherwise to produce more power than they're currently capable of and permitted to produce. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
And let's see, I've got Liz, were you next? I can't remember. I think it was Liz.
I don't know, but mine's quick.
Okay, go.
I was right there with Billy and put my hand down, but then at the end, I just want to make sure it is capacity, because I mean, we've talked about the efficiency point, and probably would have some agreement that if they were continuing to operate, we would want them to be as efficient as possible. So you might actually produce more energy using the same wood, and therefore more electricity in any given hour. So yeah, so it would have to be capacity. And when we start to use other words, energy, even power sometimes, in terms of how people think of it colloquially, I think we need to be careful. So
Good. Let me go.
Yeah.
Yes. Let me take the comments that are up, and then we'll try out some language here to see if we can.
So generate more electricity is maybe, I mean, somebody might want to just put it back just to the capacity nameplate, because I wouldn't want people to think that in any hour generating more electricity was a bad thing if it was an efficiency within capacity. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And Liz, Jane, here's what I was just, and I'm not sure this is quite right, but I was following on Billy, and then I'll go to Judy and Adam. It's something like the two facilities should not be expanded physically or otherwise to produce more power than current production capacity allows. I don't know if that doesn't work quite either, Liz. So I want to work with you a little bit, Liz, to work on the language before I go to Judy and Adam. So would it be more than the current to produce beyond the current production capacity? I'm just trying to figure out what the language is. To avoid your thing about, we're not trying to track this by hour necessarily. Overall, I don't know what the words are. Do you have any thoughts?
I would just point out that the hourly capacity is the nameplate. And so in a single hour, it can't produce more than, say, 54 megawatts. But the number of hours out of a year that it's running, that's not what we're trying to put a limit on. It's that physical maximum hourly output of the plant. So we just have to use words that fundamentally distinguish between capacity on an hourly basis and yearly runtime and yearly generation generated.
And Adam, do you have any, and I'll go to Judy. Adam, any thoughts on actually how to put that in words, given the sense we're looking at right now with Jane's screen?
I would say that should not be physically expanded to increase the hourly nameplate capacity. Period. I mean, I think that's it.
The hourly, did you say hourly? What was the word after hourly?
Output capacity. Because that's a physical remodification. They can't generate more than they're designed to or engineered to do right now.
Right. And I'm thinking to Judy's point too, Jane, for now, at least I think we'd strike that last sentence as well. Judy, go ahead, and then I'll go to Chase.
So my concern is what we've been talking about this whole time. We want to reduce the amount of trees they cut down. So it should not be, the amount of trees they use should not be expanded, because when they presented, they said they were going to use 4% more. So I think it should include the amount of trees.
One thing we might be able to do, Judy, to that represents on that 4%, which is related to the thermal change, we on number 4 below, that may be where we can address it. I don't know.
Well, I think it should be addressed there too, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. We want to leave trees standing so they sequester the carbon, right? And so if they're gonna increase or expand in any way, physically or hourly input, they're gonna need more trees.
I think we probably need some discussion about this. Chase, go ahead. Then I want others to remark on Judy's question about whether we need to talk about kind of fuel limitation in this statement. Chase, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I think, I see a little, is there any way to move the cursor perhaps?
Yeah, Judy, the little thing that.
Thank you, appreciate that. Perhaps adding the words or otherwise in between the words physically and expanded. So to read should not physically or otherwise. I don't know, Judy, if this gets at your concern, but I think it then allows for a broader interpretation such as regulatorily expanded. There may not necessarily be physical expansion, but there could be a regulatory expansion, and this would capture that.
So other thoughts on the ad that Chase just did, or the concern that Judy raised? Liz, go ahead.
Just hadn't weighed in on the other thing. I think in the last meeting, a suggestion I had was that if we were going to have this sentence, it should apply to both facilities, and this sentence now does that. But am I clear? Are we clear that taking out that next sentence doesn't affect the later down part about McNeil? In other words, it feels like that's important given what the plant has told us. So is that others' understanding as well?
And Liz, my thought, this is only editorial, thought was like to just be as simple as possible in 2, and then we will explain McNeil in number 4.
But I think to Liz's point, because this is a question I had, I just want to make sure that 2 doesn't end up conflicting with 4.
Right. You read 2 and you say, well, that says should not be expanded. So why are we even talking about 4? Like you could put a except as explained elsewhere or whatever. But yeah, that was my question.
Judy, go ahead. Chase.
So I think it's not anything about increasing the hourly output capacity. I think it should just end at should not be physically or otherwise be expanded. It's about trees. It's not about hourly output capacity. I think that should be stricken.
Would make the sentence shorter.
Yes.
And Liz, I think Liz has a concern about that because I was just watching body language. But Billy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that change, but I was going to suggest, to get to everyone's point, if we want to add increase the currently permitted hourly output capacity, because I think that's what we're talking about, right? These plants are permitted at a nameplate capacity currently. We don't want to see them expand beyond that. And I think what we heard from BED was that they're going to still operate within their kind of authorized capacity, but maybe just produce more within that range. And I could have that wrong, but I believe that's what we heard from them.
But that's not what I'm getting at, Billy. They have a huge amount of debris that people bring in. So I wouldn't, you could use that debris to continue the capacity. What I'm concerned about is the number of trees they're cutting down, and we have to be clear about that.
So I think let me take some comments. I think we may have a hard time getting agreement on that statement, which we might then just need to acknowledge we don't have agreement on, and then we can be at least explicit about it. But let's actually see where people are, to Judy's point about the kind of the input question. Billy and then Charlie.
Oh, sorry, this was a residual hand, but yeah, I think that, as I've long understood, that these plants serve an important role in the forest product sector in Vermont. And I think the conversation about impact on wood fuel consumption is a complex one that, we did not barely scratch the surface of. And I think that this is the right direction to go in with this language personally.
Charlie.
I guess similar to Billy, I understand the wood fuel consumption question. I just question, I wonder if this is the right place to address that, because it seems to be combining a separate issue with what's currently stated here. And I just want to say that I think that the question of harvesting is a good one, but I don't think we can draw a direct parallel between overall harvesting levels in the state and just this sentence here. I think that would be kind of jumping to a much bigger conclusion that we can't quite draw here.
Well, let me suggest one thing here, and we're about out of time for public comment, but I want to see if I can get through number 2 here. Is I think we just need to put in parentheses, we have a question about kind of the inputs, and I would just put it in a below where, yeah, that's it. Just I think we have questions about input, trees, amount of wood that's used for fuel, to Judy's point. And so I think we need to note that here. And then when we'll start talking through the other recommendations, we'll see if it actually gets covered elsewhere or it doesn't. And then we'll need to come back to each of these comments. I want to check in with Liz and go back to Judy. Liz, the language that Billy added, does that address any concern you have about increase the currently permitted hourly capacity? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, then it might actually be the physically or or otherwise. In other words, getting into the weeds of the first part of the sentence might be the problem. I like that last part. I think that makes sense.
Judy.
I just wanted to address Charlie's comment. Charlie, it's not that I'm talking about harvesting trees throughout the state. I'm talking about harvesting the amount of trees that they specifically harvest, McNeil and Reigate. And that needs to be addressed here. I mean, to write this whole thing and never talk about trees is ridiculous. That's what we've been talking about the whole time.
And I just want to know, Judy, there's a lot more about forestry that falls in number 3 and beyond. So I guess that's the question, is whether we need to do that in 2 here, or we can do that in other parts of the section, which I don't think we know yet. We have to keep talking through it.
Okay,
and I don't disagree either.
So do a search for trees, Patrick, and tell me where it is in here.
And I just wanted to say, my comment was more about whether the sentences that we're dealing with right now specifically relate to fuel inputs, or if we would need to create a separate one. I was worried we were trying to combine too many elements into one sentence and thereby not make it clear as to what we were getting at.
I'm just taking a quick look too.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is we have to at some point mention our concerns that we've had about trees. And this is a fine place to put it, because if you do a search on that document, you're not going to find trees anywhere.
I think we use the word forest, but we don't use trees. All right, so what I want to do is I want to kind of know, I'm not sure if we're settled yet on the word otherwise, and we still have Judy's concern about the inputs. So I want to just note that, but I want to it's not time for public comments. So I want to give if we could maybe just take it off the screen so we could see people, Jane, for a minute. Why don't we take 5-10 minutes for public comment, and we'll come back at this. So anybody wants to make a public comment, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Cheryl Joy.
Morning, everybody. So I do have a comment. I think that it's really important to put, I think it's a good idea for number 2 to say facilities should not be expanded, that's physically, et cetera. Nor to increase the current amount of biomass burned and that woody biomass, or just, I would just say, not to increase the current amount of biomass burned. You know, if the current amount of biomass is burned and the electricity generated increases and the efficiency is more than 23%, which I believe is the amount that it's efficient right now, so be it. If you're not burning any more trees, you know, and saying biomass, this is talking about biomass. And biomass does mean trees, even though I think trees are more important to say at some point, but I think you should say not to increase the current amount of biomass combusted or burned or whatever you guys choose to use, word you choose to use, but to talk about the current amount of biomass. That's very important in this very number 2. The other one, since you're going to move to it next, unless you're going to like take public comment every item, I don't think you will, but number 3, a general comment here is that it's talking about more studies, more investigating, more task groups, etc. I think that this is and there have been studies over and over. There are existing studies that talk about the very things that number 3 talks about, and you know, there have been, and there's already one study going on, which is the life cycle analysis, et cetera, which also has already been done. But that's what this group is supposed to be doing. And also this group is supposed to already be using TEK, which Judy brings in. And it's also supposed to be using more equity, which sometimes gets talked about, but needs to be increased in the discussion. And equity for, of course, not just people, but also all individual, all biota, or all, not just biota, everything. So that's it. Number 2 and 3 comments.
Thanks, Cheryl Joy.
Sure.
Other comments from the public right now? Okay, so let's go back to number 2. So I have 2 things. I'm wondering if we got rid of otherwise, if we said, because we've added the permitted piece, thanks Jane for putting it back up. If we've got the 2 existing biomass should be, because we've already described the permitted piece that Billy added, Chase, if we struck otherwise in there because we had actually permitted in there, or do you still want to leave the otherwise in? Then I'll get to Judy's point in a second.
I guess I would just be curious to know why we take it out.
Liz, did you have some concerns about the word otherwise?
No, it was just the point that once you put in expanded to increase the currently permitted hourly output capacity, even including physically or otherwise, as we originally discussed, can get confusing. Like, you know, so I guess saying that there's no ability to change anything. I don't know what expanded means in that context. You know what I mean? If we're not changing the output capacity, why are we even saying anything about physical or otherwise? That was my point.
Is it the modifiers physically or otherwise, or is it the verb expanded? Like, what is?
Given the more specificity that Billy offered, it's the modifiers physically or otherwise. Like, just as a probably really bad example, because I don't mean to take us down another rabbit hole, but if there were some change at the plant, either of the plants, like, you know, I don't know, to accommodate vehicle turnaround, or I mean, I don't know, I can just think of things that would change and could be considered by some as a physical expansion having nothing to do with currently permitted hourly output capacity. And that just feels like beyond what we should be recommending or talking about. So now, having gone through the exercise, that feels like words that should be removed to me.
And sorry, let's just be clear, is it the otherwise or the physically otherwise?
Physically or otherwise, right? Because there could be changes. Okay. I mean, I don't know what they would be, but I can imagine some. I mean, you know, a new shed put up, parking radius expanded, you know, the area where the wood is stored changed. I mean, I don't know. So.
I think it should stay in.
Judy said,
Because how are we going to delineate what it is, what the expansion is, if we don't have something in there saying physical or otherwise? You're forgetting, Liz, that this is an archaeological site. So even a turnaround should have some oversight.
Yeah, no, understood. And I was making it generic to both plants for sure. Understood that there's criteria that would have to be applied.
Both plants are archaeological sites.
so I wonder if this sentence is necessary but not sufficient. I wonder if people could agree to the sentence as is, but it's what else we need to add that we need more discussion about. Whether it's the footprint expansion to Judy's concern about, archaeological and other impacts to indigenous lands, whether it's the question of inputs in terms of trees. Chase.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I guess I'm just wondering, Liz, physically or otherwise, if those two things are driving at an increase in currently permitted hourly output capacity, I'm having a hard time sort of understanding why the sorts of examples you gave would sort of create an issue if the ultimate thing that those changes would be measured against would be an increase in the currently permitted hourly output capacity. I'm just not necessarily seeing risk there.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how someone parses the words, right? Physically or otherwise expanded, physically or otherwise expanded too. So I don't know. Just upon reading it a few times, it concerned me that we might be like, if our intent is the last part, do we even need physically or otherwise? Because what we mean is not expanded to increase, right? So anyway, that's just my thinking. And I'm just one person on the task group. So
What if we put the physically or otherwise after hourly output capacity? Plant should not be expanded to expand currently permitted output capacity physically or otherwise.
How about, let's do that. Liz, that helps. Okay. All right. Okay. Judy, comment? Judy, maybe is that a vestigial hand or do you have a new comment?
No, I was going to respond to what Liz says because physical and otherwise was added because she wanted a definition of expanded. But I think putting it in there in another place will work too.
Okay. All right. So I think this addresses, I think the way that we've now written this addresses many concerns. It doesn't address the input question. So I think, and that's specific. So I guess the question is, what do we do with the idea of the biomass in? What do people want to say about that, either here or, as Charlie said, maybe it goes in a different sentence we haven't written yet around the fuel source. It seems to me like two as written, people, again, it may not be sufficient, but it sounds like people could live with this sentence as written.
I have a question, Patrick, about the two existing biomass. People are going to know who we're talking about, right? Because there's so many biomass facilities now that do like schools and colleges and stuff like that.
We could be explicit and just say, right, yeah, McNeil, right, to be very specific.
Well, if you think people aren't going to understand, I would be specific.
People okay with that? So we note those just to be clear. To Judy's point, we don't actually know who's going to read this. So, okay. So in terms of inputs into these existing plants, we're going to get to their future in a bit. Is there any language people can imagine around addressing the fuel or the biomass input? I think Cheryl had suggested, as just an option is something about not expanded or not use more biomass than they currently do somewhere. I'm curious what people think about a sentence somewhere along those lines. Charlie?
I'm just curious if we have a sentence around not expanding current consumption volume. What is the metric we're using for current consumption volume? Like, is it what they've used this year? Is it what they used on average? I'm just trying to remember how that factored into our conversations.
Anybody, if we were to say don't expand current, current biomass inputs, what is the metric or the tool we use to describe what that is? Anybody know?
I guess I only say that because I think it does vary. And so if we're going to put a limit on something, we need to understand like what metric we're using to establish that.
Drew, go ahead.
On McNeil's website, they say they use 30 cords per hour.
That's like an average, right? So would we calculate, is that?
No, it doesn't. It's not an average. It says a full load, approximately 76 wet tons of wood chips are consumed per hour or 30 cords.
But I thought we understood that like actual, I use production for lack of a better word, does vary seasonally or as the load demands, or am I misunderstanding that?
I'm reading from their website.
No, yeah, and I understand that, Judy. To me, conceptually, it doesn't seem like they would be putting through the exact same volume of material every hour, 365, 24/7. I mean,
Well, it does to me if they're selling the credits off.
Here's one thought on language. I'm not sure if this is quite right. And again, we would not be in the business of defining this, but it would give some definition, which is, furthermore, the facility should not use more biomass than their historic biomass usage. And historic, I realize we could debate all day what that meant, but at least would try to set somewhat of a kind of marcation point.
Can I propose some different language, just saying that they should not use more than they are permitted to use?
Adam, say that one more time.
Just to change the metric to permitted. I mean, each facility has an output maximum capacity. Each plant sometimes idles down and operates at a lower load and output and fuel generation per hour. And there are the number of hours over the course of a year change. So like there is total variability in fuel consumption and runtime over the year. If we're saying that you can't consume more than you did last year, their ability to respond to load, if load on the grid increases, there's more electrification, more heat pumps going in, you're tying the hands of these facilities to actually do their purpose. So I just want to make sure that if we're doing that, we're intentional about the consequences of limiting their fuel consumption.
And then just a question whether Jane straight to write the sentence clearly is the permit's not for inputs, right? They're not saying you can't use more than X amount of wood per year. Their permit is on their output, correct?
I don't know. I would just say that like we shouldn't be limiting the amount of hours out of the year that they're operating if there's more demand for.
Right. And I'm just trying to figure out the sentence. So what Jane's written is, furthermore, the facility should not use more biomass than they are permitted. Does that capture it, or is there a better way to write that?
That works for me.
Okay. Judy.
Then they are currently permitted.
Yep. You could say currently permitted. That's right. And that gets avoids the regulatory change, Richard, that someone else raised earlier. Good point. Judy.
Aren't we, I'm thinking what Adam just said, aren't we trying to limit this? Isn't that our goal? We've been told they're not efficient. We've been told they're polluting. We've been told there's a health issue. Don't we want to limit this? I do.
I guess that, Judy, you're raising a question to the group. I mean, there is that number 3 that Jane just kind of scrolled to is importantly talking about the future and whether or not, in fact, these plants should be phased out, which is something we need to get to. But I don't know. I mean, I guess the question is, do people agree with Judy that we should not want any more sort of biomass than currently used. I think that we've had permitted, which could allow for, years in which it has a lot more runtime than others for any number of reasons, right? We've talked about. So I just want to test where we're at with agreement or disagreement on the point Judy just made.
I think to Judy's point, I think that we're in agreement as far as conceptually goes. I just struggle with how do we translate that into a sentence that can go here that provides that metric of what we're actually saying. So I don't disagree with Judy's the overarching point you're making. It's just I don't know how to translate that into where's the line, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's an overarching statement about reducing over time, but that gets into more generalities, which are harder to actually pin down.
Other thoughts on this? I mean, Charlie just raising the point. Judy, I think, agrees with the general points. It's hard to figure out how to kind of describe it then in a metric.
That doesn't mean it shouldn't be in there.
No, and I think we have it in there. We just may not have it in the way in the language that you're comfortable with, or other people may not be comfortable with either. Jane, can you move your cursor just because we can't see the language? Sorry. There we go. Thank you. Judy, do you have a suggestion for language that you would be more comfortable with in number 2, that second sentence? Furthermore, the facility should. Do you have proposed alternative language?
I would say they should not use more biomass and they should strive to use less. Because if they strive to use less, that's going to put them in a position of phasing out.
And that gets potentially to our next one.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that could also get to efficiency, like if they can make more power with less. I mean, there's different ways to use it. I guess my question is, if we say do not use more biomass, my question gets to more than what?
Yeah, I'm not saying use, I'm saying strive towards reducing, but you got to remember, Charlie, that we were told this is going out of state in the form of credits.
Yeah.
So it's not even impacting Vermonters other than health wise.
Yep. Yeah. And my only point is to somebody reading this recommendation as it would relate to permit renewal or a modification or something. If we use the words don't use more, I think we need to be explicit about more than what, I guess is my only point.
Right.
Well, so if we said the facility should strive to use less biomass than the previous year.
So we could say we could add a sentence that says and after the sentence there, and the facility should strive, or we encourage the facilities to strive, however we say it, strive to use less biomass. And you could say either just generically, or you could say yes, each less biomass from the previous year, however you'd want to say it.
Use less biomass from the previous year.
And if we put that language in, how would people react to that? Jane, we'll just put that in there just so people can look at it. Yeah, it's after permitted. I think it's after permitted. Yeah.
So, or would it be replacing should not use with strive to use less?
Right. The facility should strive to use less
Okay.
biomass
There we
than
go.
the previous permit, than permitted or whatever, or the previous year.
There, how about that?
I mean, I think as an aspirational goal statement, that it's okay.
Anybody disagree with that sentence as written? Adam?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, McNeil is dual fire and has capability. It doesn't run on natural gas, but if we're saying use less biomass, they generate the same amount, but they're piped up to natural gas. I certainly don't want to say anything that encourages electrical generation using natural gas from the facility as a means to meet this recommendation.
Yeah, I guess the key here would be, can we increase efficiency in a way that meets the power generation output with less inputs?
Which you
I think is a fine aspirational goal to have.
and Adam's point is there could be a substitution effect that was unintended in that sentence. Liz and then Richard.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo what Adam said. I feel personally that I'm over my skis on expertise, given what we heard, because there are things in that second sentence that have been added that, compared to what would Vermonters be utilizing otherwise, including if the expansion that we're talking about, which, you know, again, is not 100% clear from this one, involves, for example, the thermal applications that we've heard about, you know, when someone were using a particular fuel oil, or heck, was using directly burned wood in their home, which we've also heard has particulate and other concerns. So personally, I don't feel like supporting that second sentence is something I can do given what we've heard, nor do I think it's necessary for the recommendation there. But that's just my feeling on it.
Richard and then Judy.
Yeah, I actually have a factual question, and I know Liz knows the answer to this. Under Vermont's renewable energy standard that applies to utilities, is electricity produced from these two plants considered renewable?
I believe so. GMP actually doesn't utilize any biomass for our res reporting, so we actually should check with a utility that does. We don't utilize it because we strive to be 100% carbon free annually, and we are 100% carbon free, and therefore we don't use the biomass for those annual reporting.
Okay, so thank you. I was wondering whether there is an incentive for utilities to rely on biomass electricity in order to meet the requirements of the renewable energy standard. Because if there is, maybe we need to change the renewable energy standards definitions.
I believe, Richard, that it qualifies as tier 1.
Yeah.
And you're right that I should know that immediately. So I apologize that I say I believe, but I'm virtually certain it's a tier 1 qualifying resource. I believe that at least one other state qualifies it as a resource with more value than that, which is, to Judy's point, one of the reasons that trading the RECs out of state rather than retiring them here can be economically beneficial for Vermonters, you know, in other words, lower power bills by doing that. And I believe it's Connecticut, but Billy might, I don't want to pass the torch, but somebody who actually follows that issue closer than I do may have a better idea.
Let's answer that. I think, just to confirm, I believe our Vermont res does include these sorts of plants in the tier 1. For tier 2 facilities, there is separately developed renewability standards through rule that apply to a facility that would qualify for tier 2 under the res.
Great, thanks, Billy. I've got Judy and Chase and want to just check in. So Judy.
Yeah, so I don't see cutting down trees over and over and over again and not living long enough to see the forest regenerate. I would not call that renewable. The other thing that I want to bring into play here is the fact that if we put economy first, which we've done a lot of the times, and not the health of the forests and the health of the people, then there's always going to be a need to make it be worded differently. And there's no comparison in here because Darren Springer's report did not show us how much fossil fuels is used. And the amount of fossil fuels they're using is huge when you consider the vehicles hauling the trees and the trains that come every day and the natural gas they use to ignite it. When you consider all of that fossil fuels, he he said he didn't have that in his report, so we don't even know that yet.
Chase.
I just wanted to speak to Richard's question, but I see, Richard, you've turned off your camera, so I don't know if you're still there. Hi, Richard. Yes, under current Vermont law, wood biomass is considered renewable under the definition of renewable, which means it's eligible to generate renewable energy credits that are used for tier 1. If you look at the electricity generation in Vermont, a pretty substantial portion of the electricity that we generate and use in Vermont is from wood biomass. It's around 7%. If you then look at the electricity after we retire those renewable energy credits, it appears that we have zero electricity in the state of Vermont from wood biomass because we sell those renewable energy credits out of state. So it's sort of one of those situations where when you look at what's being used, where are those electrons coming from that we're consuming? It's from wood bio, or a chunk of it is from wood biomass. But if you're looking at the sort of like post rec sale, then it appears as if none is coming from wood biomass. So I think that's part of the tension. But to your initial question, yes, wood biomass does qualify under the res and does receive renewable energy credits, which is what Massachusetts changed over the summer, that wood biomass electricity generation would not be eligible for renewable energy credits in their market.
Jane, can we do this on the furthermore sentence? Can we just highlight that in yellow? I don't think we have agreement there, but I don't want to necessarily lose the idea. So maybe I think we highlight that in yellow. I think the first sentence we're close. I think we're close to an accommodation for folks, but the second one not. Judy, did you have another comment? Put your hand up. Nope. Okay. All right. My thought is for now, we're at the time. I want to take a little time just to get initial comment on number 3, which is important because it's tied to that. The yellow piece we're going to just have to come back to, but I think on 3, this was the idea of the question of phase out. And I know there was, I think my general sense is there was a willingness to support the idea of the study. I think there was some concerns about how the language was written here. So I want to just get at least initial feedback on the language for 3. And or intent, and then I think we need to kind of check in on where we're at with the other sections and where we're at from given today's work. So on 3, thoughts about how this could be worded differently or improved to kind of capture I think the intent that we're having. Judy.
I don't think we're clear. Our intent has been to phase out, but then we're asking that the council should commission an evidence-based study by a third party. I think we should state our intent to phase it out, and it can be backed up with a study. But we've taken in a lot of research from a lot of people, and I think we have come to the conclusion, for the most part, it needs to be phased out. And we don't clearly say that.
Judy, let me hold. I want to test that in a second. Let me go to Richard, then I'll come back to actually test that with folks. So Richard, go ahead.
Actually, I'd like to see Judy's comment pursued a little bit. That's not why I raised my hand, but the part about phasing out the plants could be in the first sentence of number 3.
Exactly. Let me just test that. So I think it would be something like the 2 existing electricity-led biomass plants should be phased out, period. How many people on the task group here can agree with that? Just do a thumbs up, or just actually use the hand raise signal just so it's easier for me to see. So if you can agree with yes, they should be phased out, please just use the raise hand function just so I can see how many folks agree. Should be phased out. Okay. I've got 3 hands up. All right, you guys take your hands down for a second. Judy, take your hand down for a second if you could. Great. Okay, how many folks cannot accept or support the biomass plant should be phased out as a proposition today? How many people cannot support that?
you open the screen so we can see how people are voting?
Yeah, we've got, I think it was, yeah, and Judy was, Judy, Richard and Chase said, yes, they could live with it. And Liz and Adam cannot.
I just don't even know what that question means, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like,
That's,
Like-
I was gonna
Yeah,
say the same thing, because I was
What's the
okay with the
timeline, what's the
draft.
process, what's like? Yeah, I would need
And
more clarity on
I was
what-
okay with the draft, just
Yeah.
to be clear.
And
Like, I think we've all long discussed that between now and 2050, it's unlikely these plants are gonna be in operation. It's unlikely they're gonna be a significant part of our energy future. And maybe there's some agreement there, but between now and then, I just don't know what the implications of that are.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Billy. We need to say that. We all agreed to that in a sentence.
but I'm not hearing agreement, Judy, right now about that sentence. I'm hearing that
Well-
I really say a factual statement. They will very likely be phased out over time.
But that's fine. But Billy just said he agrees, he believed we all agreed it should be phased out over time. Whatever the sentence says, it needs to state what our recommendation is first, and then continue with, if they want to do a study, go ahead. But this is what our recommendation is.
Charlie, go ahead.
I mean, I think Billy kind of captured what my feeling is here, and I saw this more as a recommendation around planning for that future, as opposed to, because my problem with just saying we should phase them out is the question I would come back with from a legislator or regulator is, okay, when, how quickly, how do we do this? And the recommendation as written gets at that, I think. And so I guess I'm
Isn't-
comfortable with the language as written, because that would kind of prepare the answers to that question.
Isn't that what the study should do?
I think as written, that's what the study looks at, is how would that happen? What would the impacts be? How would you make a just transition?
Right.
So I think the language, I guess I'm okay with the language as written, although it's not on the screen anymore, but I think I am.
We'll come back to that, but let's go ahead.
I was also okay with the language, I believe, that was on the screen, and just, I had thought that, at least for me, part of the purpose was to have a study for all three parts of what was on there, which was, I think, if, when, and what on time, and on what timeline, because those are matters for kind of further expert work. And yeah, so that's why I was supportive of that.
Adam.
I just echo what Liz said. I totally supported the draft language on pursuing the study, but just say flat out they should be, mothballed. I wasn't supportive of changing that essence.
Jane, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make a nuanced point about the language where it says that the Climate Council shall commission a study. That, the Climate Council doesn't have a budget or doesn't commission contract out work. So just want to nuance that language a little bit about how the council would support, prioritize a state agency in doing that work, but that's not what the council does.
Well, Jane, let's go ahead and put the language up. So I think I'm not hearing agreement on a kind of a upfront statement, but I am hearing agreement on the general paragraph. So I guess, Jane, one question is there a way to edit that so it's more in keeping with what the council's authorities are and are not? Should request, advocate, what's the right word? Okay. So I'm Richard, you were next after we tested Judy's question.
I guess I just wanted to make a general comment that some of us on this work group would like to see all wood burning for electricity and building heat phased out. Others are not so sure. And so what a group like, and we're about evenly divided, I think, on that question. So what evenly divided groups like this is they commission a study. They say, well, let's study it some more, because we're not reaching consensus in our current configuration. So I don't mind doing further study, but I do think that that a clear recommendation that says this task group recommends moving towards phasing out these plants would be a good thing.
And and I don't know, Richard, whether you want to suggest language there or not. Maybe you could even put a quick, if you wouldn't, if we're trying to avoid using chat, but if you could even think of a sentence and quickly put it in chat.
Well, I would take the in the fourth line, it says how to phase out Vermont's 2 existing biomass electrical facilities. I would put that phrase in at the top of this section.
So okay, so and so I guess you could say that this group recommends investigating if, when, and how to phase out Vermont's 2 existing Vermont biomass facilities, and then we could put the rest of the stuff below it. Is that, Richard, what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Okay. Give Jane just a second, and Jane, what Jane's kind of editing a little bit, and Richard, we won't lose this. Liz, you had a point.
Yeah, it was an old hand, but this may just be a point of lack of consensus. I support the second sentence there. I wouldn't support leading with the answer.
Yeah, I would agree with Liz on that.
So I think we can make the readability clearer by putting that second or third sentence up front, but it'd be the same sentence, it would just be in a different order. Judy, go ahead. Excuse me.
I agree with Richard. We have to be succinct in our recommendation. And we've spent 8 months learning how bad biomass burning is. And I don't think, well, from what I heard from Billy and what I heard from Charlie, that they disagree with the phasing out of biomass. What they disagree with was the verbiage you used in that statement. So I think we need to come up with a statement. If you don't like what Richard suggested, come up with something else. There has to be a succinct recommendation, or this state is going to repeat what we just did for the last 8 months.
Chase, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm wondering if the sticking points here, if there might be 2. One, so I'm going to test my assumption around whether these are the sticking points, and if so, maybe we can find a solution somewhere in there. Seems like one sticking point is if we're phasing out wood biomass electricity generation, what's going to replace it? And so perhaps then, if that assumption is accurate, if that is something that's sort of sticking people up, perhaps then we could add some language around saying something such as the Climate Council should advocate for a phase out of wood biomass electricity generation and a phase up of clean, suitable alternatives. Probably a lot of work we could do in that space, but just put a pin in that for a second. The second thing that I see potentially hanging people up is that phasing out wood biomass electricity generation could mean phasing out a market for rural working economies, foresters, landowners, which could harm them financially. And so then perhaps if that assumption is true, then maybe the solution is that the Climate Council should also advocate for identifying and strengthening alternative markets for sustainably harvested wood. So I'll just put that out there just to test if those 2 things are the kind of hangups, and if so, perhaps some language around them could frame out a potential consensus or solution here.
Judy.
I'm sorry, I can't tell if my hand is up or down without seeing. I guess it's down, sorry.
No worries at all. Chase, one more time. So you mentioned a few things about, phasing down and then phasing up replacements, replacing base load. What other few points did you make?
So let's see, advocate for a phase up wood biomass. Okay, yeah, and a phase up of, clean renewable energy, maybe perhaps a word like replacement or something like that. Again, we can tinker with that. The second thing would be adding and advocate for identifying and strengthening alternative markets for the rural working economy, like alternative wood markets for the rural working economy. Again, we can mess around with the language. I just wanted to test with folks who are on the fence if identifying those two areas and working through them might bring us to a point of consensus.
Didn't we learn, Chase, that the current amount of wood they're using is coming from out of state, not in state?
We did learn that, and I think that that those markets aren't necessarily the ones that the state of Vermont is most concerned with preserving. They just kind of get caught up into the conversation because the wood biomass facilities require so much wood that those other markets become a necessity to keep those biomass facilities open. It seems really that the concerns that have been voiced, as I understand them, I don't mean to put words in anyone's mouth, so forgive me if I am, but the concerns that I'm hearing from Charlie and from Billy, and I believe from Adam too, are more concerned with wood harvested in Vermont in sustainable, in ecologically beneficial ways, and that those are the economies that we want to preserve, and that those are the ecological harvesting practices that we're interested in. And so if that's right, if that's really sort of our core interest, then I think the Climate Council should, and this is my proposal, I'm hoping we can discuss and hopefully agree on, that the council should advocate for finding alternative markets that would support those economies and those Vermonters, so that if we're phasing out one market, we're phasing in another one that can replace it.
I'm having trouble with the use of the word sustainable and cutting down trees.
I'd be really happy to see, that's not my area of expertise. And so I'm happy to listen and learn on that point. I think all I was hoping to do here is just see if we were to identify those two things, replacement revenue streams or markets and replacement energy sources, that would both phase up as the biomass facilities were phasing down. If in that space we can find agreement.
I've got Adam, you had your hand up, and then Richard, you had your hand up. Adam.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chase. Thank you. And I think it was by and large kind of already there with the existing language. So I guess my question is, are you suggesting reshuffling? Because there's the highlighted text that I think Jane has her cursor on that, and the last sentence. So I think those points are covered there already, but I appreciate what you're saying, Chase.
Richard.
I do appreciate Chase's constructive suggestions. I mean, I like the way you think about this. I want to make a more general comment. Burning wood for electricity is not as bad as burning fuel oil or coal to make electricity, but it's not as good as generating electricity from solar panels or from wind, from a greenhouse gas point of view. So we're kind of stuck in this in-between space. I readily acknowledge that burning wood is better than burning fuel oil to generate electricity, but that's not the question here. The question really has to do with what, as Chase has mentioned, can we phase out burning wood in favor of something that is even cleaner? If we had a electricity generating plant in Burlington, just like McNeil, except it burned coal, we wouldn't have any problem, any of us, saying that we ought to phase it out quickly as possible. As I said, in my view, wood is sort of partially renewable, it's so on the scale of things, it's somewhere between fossil fuels and purely renewable electricity like wind or solar. And so that's part of why we're having trouble. And my last point is that if we decide as a state that we want to favor or privilege or at least support wood burning for electricity and also for building heat, knowing that it has an impact on greenhouse gases, then we need, in our overall climate plan, we need to adjust and reduce carbon dioxide emissions somewhere else from some other sector, whether it's from transportation or from agriculture or from building heat. In order to reach our goal, if we accept that we're going to generate a certain amount of CO2 from burning biomass, then we have to allow for it in our overall plan. Thanks for listening.
I'm going to go to public comment briefly. I want to kind of see where we're at with this ends, and we need to talk about next steps. So we're running out of time here. So if people could, Jane, you mind just taking this off screen for 1 second? If anybody has a public comment, if people could make that now, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Cheryl Joy.
Okay, thank you. You all have raised some really good points, and I guess I'll take them backwards because Richard just made a point, which was we have to reduce it in one spot, and if we don't reduce it in that spot, we have to reduce it in another spot. But I think that should be taken a little bit further because we don't need to do it that way because we're in such dire circumstances right now. We actually need to reduce it in all the spots and in all the places right now, not just, okay, well, let's keep this one and, instead reduce in a different spot. We have to do it everywhere. And as much as possible, not just, okay, let's try a little bit at first, let's do too much at first. And then after we get things under control, we can dial it back and start creating carbon emissions again, or a little bit here and there, or whatever. I actually don't think that's a good idea, but it's just to illustrate the point. So good point, Richard, but let's reduce it everywhere. Okay. For number 3, I think somebody's already brought this point up, and I don't know who it was, but you already committed to saying that you're going to reduce, you're going to phase out the biomass, or recommend that it's phased out in number 2. Just in number 3, just own it and say it, because you already say it in conversation. And you said it in number 2, that you want it to not expand and you want it to be less and less each year if possible. So it's just saying the same thing, but in a different way in number 3. Another question is, a question, which is this intervale meeting open to the public? I mean, I don't know if I can attend or not, but I would be interested if I'm able to swing it. And I'm hoping that it is. Next thing that came up was, okay. So with regard to what Chase said, absolutely. I think Chase was mainly talking about a just transition for people. Chase and somebody else, Adam or Richard actually, talking about if this was coal, we'd be saying it right away. We'd be saying, okay, let's not have it anymore because it's creating too much impact. And we don't have coal miners here in Vermont, so we're not worried about the impact to the miners, the coal miners. But we are worried about the impact to the people harvesting wood, right? Because they're Vermonters. And when we do need to support them. And by the way, burning wood is worse than burning coal. Remember? I don't know what it was, 1.5 times worse or something like that. But so we do have to support the the people who are the foresters and the loggers and the people owning the woodlots, and they should be forests and not woodlots because it is agriculture as it is now. But we have to support them, but we don't necessarily need to make sure that there are trees that they can cut down. You know, we can support them in, we don't have, yeah, we need to use wood, but we don't need to necessarily use as much wood. And so we need to support and have a just transition, but it doesn't necessarily have to be logging. It can be other supporting foresters in other ways, you know, and it doesn't have to necessarily be not out in the woods. But we don't have to specify that let's support them and have ecological or sustainable forestry. Let's talk about that needs to be nuanced. And I have a ton to say about that, but of course I'm not going to say it right here. But I would really like to be a part of this conversation. Anyway, that's it for now. And those are just basic points that I wanted to touch on. But I would really love it if you guys would talk about all those, you know, and thank you, Patrick, for bringing up that other comment that I had and actually talking about it and using it. That was really fabulous. Thank you very much. So, okay, that's it. Thank you for hearing me.
So thank you, Cheryl Joy. So number 3, we're not there. We're also out of time. So I want to just, Jane, I think let's talk about what the idea is for Intervale, how it would work, if people agree that we should meet in person, that kind of piece. So Jane, you want to say a little bit more about that and get some quick reaction from the group here?
Sorry, I had a message in the chat that I was trying to read to me. So yeah, Pat suggested to me, since he was going to be in place, that oftentimes to bring these kinds of discussions and documents across the finish line, that meeting in person can be a very helpful tool. Originally, we had thought about Montpelier, but understanding and appreciating where folks are traveling from, I actually felt like Burlington was actually a more central location. I was able to, as I said, hold a room at the Intervale Foundation, the Hayloft, to actually host the meeting next Wednesday. I appreciate that that date and time doesn't work for everybody. So just want to hear from you all if that feels worthwhile, and if next Wednesday can work for folks to travel, and then refine with you briefly what time that meeting could be at. I held the room, just so folks know, from 8 to 1, assuming we wouldn't want to meet as early as we typically do, but just held it then. Thought perhaps that a 9 to 12 meeting would make most sense. Yeah, and then obviously, as you all speak to meeting and time, Cheryl Joy brought this up in her comment, but I'll just ask this of all of you. The task groups meeting, we've been obviously meeting and hosting them publicly because of the value in that space. Happy to do that in this space, but not sure if it actually makes the most sense at this point, just because we really want to have a working session to get through the doc, and then it won't be anywhere near final. It'll still be draft for discussion in a public meeting the following week. So happy to make it whatever folks want. And there is technology there, so we could also have in person for task group members and still host it on Zoom so that folks could listen in if that's an option too that folks want to do. So varied approaches.
And again, really up to you how you want to meet to try to finish the work here. Richard.
I'm sorry, I want to ask, because I'm not all that familiar with Burlington, where is this place?
Yeah, it's right down on the Winooski River in the Intervale. So it's off of Pine Street. Well, not Pine Street, whatever. What is the river? I haven't been down there in forever, but
Intervale.
Off of the.
It's off from
Riverside.
It's right next to the McNeil.
Riverside.
Okay, thank you.
Riverside Avenue.
So again,
And Richard, I will drive, and if you are taking a bus in, I'd be more than happy to chauffeur you down to the actual location, as I'm sure others would too.
So I wanted to see if people think a meeting in person makes sense to try to continue to hammer things out. I know Bill already expressed a concern about availability, or we can kind of keep cranking through our Zoom meetings as we've been trying to do. So what's people's preference here? And I'm just going to go around the room quickly to see. So Richard, what's your preference?
I look forward to seeing people in person. I think that the dynamics will change, and I think it will be a good thing.
Liz, how about you?
I'm fine with it. I'm probably most local, so. And
Chase?
I've got it on my calendar.
Excellent. Chase?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Adam?
As long as I can hobble my way in, I'm good to go.
Billy, I know you expressed the concerns. I want to give you a chance to speak before I go to Charlie and Judy.
I think it's a great idea for the group to meet in person. I'm just sad I can't be there. So, you know, as long as the understanding is I have an opportunity to kind of weigh in the future, I'm just more sad I can't join you all because it sounds like a great opportunity.
Billy, to that point, what we can do is try to churn through all the language that we can and have it like ready to go, but then we wouldn't actually approve it, quote unquote, among this group until the following meeting when you would be present, if that would potentially work, and a chance for you to weigh in if you don't like where we're heading in X, Y, or Z.
Great. Yeah, I think you all have a general sense of kind of where I am on a lot of these issues. So I'm confident you'll make progress towards consensus, but I think that makes sense to me. Thanks, Pat.
Charlie, what's your preference?
Yeah, I'm happy to meet in person, and I can be flexible as to start time, as Jane indicated, if that changes. So just let me know. And I apologize, I have to hop off to get to another meeting. So thanks, everybody.
We're late. Thanks, Charlie. Judy, how about you?
I'm fine with meeting in person. I just want to mention one thing too. I believe in the beginning, Jane said she was going to warn the meeting. And under open meeting law, is when you warn a meeting, isn't it open to the general public?
Yep. Good point. Thank you.
So Cheryl Joy, to your question, it would be open to the public. I'm going to put it just a note from Cheryl Joy to me too, just for everybody to take a look at too, just so you know. Okay, so I think people are good with meeting in person. With the
Just one comment I will say, and I think we can talk about this. I will post the meeting online on the calendar. It'll have a physical address rather than the Zoom meeting. It'll also have probably a Zoom meeting option, so folks who can't travel can listen in then. I will make a note that the space only holds 20 people.
Great. And I think, and I guess, Jane, you don't have any, there's no way for, I mean, we know our group's coming, but the exception of Billy, in terms of like the other subcommittees, we don't know how many are coming, right? Maybe you could ask for a count, or they'll let you know or something, just so we can accommodate. And, you know, for folks here, I think Cheryl Joe, you expressed interest. So I think we would probably set the table so the task group's at the table and everyone else is kind of listening secondarily, but we try to accommodate everybody if we can. Is that right, Jane? And we'll have it on Zoom in some fashion in any case.
Not to belabor this, and since I won't be there, it's kind of moot, but like, are we ready to start talking with other subcommittees, considering that this task group hasn't finalized its recommendations yet? Just a question.
I don't really believe that they'll be actively participating in next week's meeting. We can set the expectation that they would be listeners at that meeting, and then that the meeting at the following week, the hope would be that they would be able to be more active participators.
Got it. Thank you.
I think it would be primarily, in some ways, they'd almost be members of the public. They'd be listening in. We might have a comment period, but this group has a lot of work to get done in that time. And then in terms of just last thing, and then we'll close. Start time, 8, 9. What do we have it till 1? So what's people's preference for start time? Especially if you're driving or traveling.
I mean, I'll just I know Charlie's more than an hour away, and Richard is an hour away, and Richard had already alluded to me that not starting at 8:30 would be great. So why don't we just say 9, and I'll put that out as a test and see what everybody says to that.
Okay, so 9 to 1. Okay, good. All right, so we'll develop a, again, the agenda is really going to be working through all the language and then figuring out what to do with the front short piece. That Jane, is the front piece, have you shared that with the group yet?
I did share it. Well, I posted it online for today. I might just reshare it and ask folks to send me any comments or edits, and then we could bring forward a revised one for next Wednesday.
I think that'd be good to send that out explicitly. The shortened front piece would go on top of these recommendations, and then we'll work through the recommendations, and then we'll talk about the what we do or don't do with the findings. Okay, good. All right. I know last time. Judy,
the other piece, Jane, we didn't discuss was, is it a tour or is it a meeting?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my gut is that it's a meeting mostly with a tour for an hour at the end. Is that what folks would like to see on the agenda?
Jane, what do you have as the stop time? Sorry, just so I can.
I booked the room for 9 to 1, but what I would suggest, if folks agree, is that we have 9 to noon as the meeting, and then an optional or hopefully supported tour from 12 to 1.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
Jane-
I have some concern that I'd be able to attend the meeting and not the tour, and I don't want to, but you know, I know everybody's calendars will be different, so.
And Jane, in terms of food, can we figure out something for people to have access to some lunch or whatever it is? I know people have to run, so.
That's a very hard thing at the States, but I can try.
Okay, all right, we'll figure something out. Okay, we're past time. Thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch. Good hard work today, and we'll see you all next week in person. All right, thanks all.